Attention all white people. If you are watching this show and you find yourself struggling with black people in the modern day era and how we feel when we view injustice or police brutality, or if you just don't get what we want, this scene is the scene for you white people. Okay, so I'm fresh off of finishing this week's episode of Lovecraft, season 1, and listen, I'm very much excited. But before we get into any talking, first things first, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe please. If you're watching on Facebook, follow the page, leave a like, share it, and on either platform, leave a comment. This week's main question has to be, what was your most favorite moment from this week's episode? For me personally, I have two, so let's jump right into it. So, the speech that Ruby gave. Attention all white people. If you are watching this show and you find yourself struggling with black people in the modern day era and how we feel when we view injustice or police brutality, or if you just don't get what we want, this scene is the scene for you white people. We just want you to care. The audacity of us humble Negroes, lowly Negroes that just want you to give a damn when something bad happens to one of us in the public eye. Ruby laid it out perfectly. Everything she said in that space, very short window, was very much how most African Americans feel when we see instances of police brutality. When Christina came back, she used the names of Emmett Till and others. But if she would have substituted that with George Floyd, with Sandra Bland, with Philando Castile, with Tamir Rice, with Eric Gardner, all those names, Ruby's speech would still apply to us, and Christina's attitude still applies to some today. Like, they just don't care. I was glad that her character, Christina's character, actually said, like, no, I don't care. Because it's the honesty that I feel like we're lacking in America today. I could probably go on this topic for a bit, but we've had enough of that. We deal with that every day. Let's move on to my second most favorite moment from this episode. The monster at the end. So I knew that the father was going to mess up the spell. As soon as he said dyslexic, I knew he was finna mess that up. But boy, did he mess it up in a good way. Like, instead of protecting your son with this spell of protection, you gave him monsters at his command almost. I was like, man, this is super awesome. Like, this is what I came to the show to see. Some monsters doing monster stuff. Murdering folks. It was rough. I enjoyed it. Other highlights from the episode that I feel like are noteworthy. Number one being, I really love the fact on an emotional side that the father and son kind of reconciled, had a conversation. They seem to be moving forward. Now, again, if this was real life, there would be much more conversations to be had. But for the intents and purposes of the show, I'm satisfied. I'm glad that they moving forward together. Glad that Tick can accept and move forward. Great job in that regard. Now let's address the sex scene of this week's episode. For the technical way this was shot, the film crew, the direction, the special effects team, you have my unlimited respect. Technically, this had to be a hell of a thing to shoot, edit, and render with CG and all the other elements that went into creating this scene. And you know what you did with all that effort and all that work? You created the nastiest damn sex scene I think I've ever seen in my life. Because if you watch any of my other videos, I did one talking about how when Michael K. Williams spit in his hand, like, that was super nasty, but that wasn't the actual sex scene itself. That was just him hacking up a lung and spitting in his hand and doing the rest of that. Like, that's one thing. But this scene was the actual sex with a black person coming out of a white person. Like, bruh. First of all, what made you think of that? And again, it was explained, but what made the writers and everyone else think of that? It's a hell of a thing to see. Second, You rendered it great. Technically, it looked great, but boy, was it, whew, like, man, that's just rough looking. Like, that's nasty. I'm sorry, but it is. Moving on from that, on to another excellent point of the show that was made, and it's almost like a footnote that could be left. Tick went to the future and got a book from his son, because I remember seeing the book in his hand at the end of last week's episode. Didn't think too much of it, figured, okay, that's gonna be something to explain. And what a hell of an explanation it is. Wow, this dude went to the future and finds out, one, I have a son, two, I'm witnessing riots of white people and a woman with a robotic arm. How far in the future is this? When you look at the picture on the back of the book, like, George is the name that he has, and that looks like an older picture. It doesn't look like it's that far in the future. Also leads me to believe that maybe he went into the future, but of a different timeline, because I have a feeling that things just won't work out like that. The only thing that I'm slightly underwhelmed with when it comes to this episode, and maybe they was just planting seeds for the future, but like Gia being present in this week's episode and having a very tiny role to play. I really hope that they can revisit this character. I really hope that they can come back around and show us some more backstory with her. Like, I liked her character. I liked her foxtail thing, like, even though it was super weird and very off-putting the first time seeing it. I just wanted her to play a bigger role in the back half of things, and it does not appear like she will. Hopefully she comes back around. Anyway, that's my spoiler talk for this week's episode. I enjoyed it a lot. I feel like, again, I don't track the number of episodes, but I'm kind of all over the place with the amount of shows I'm watching, movies I'm watching, things I'm reviewing and posting. So I don't remember what we have next, but this feels like a penultimate episode. This feels like the last little bit of setup that we get before the finale. So if that's where we are, great job. If not, I'm ready to see more than one more episode of this. I think I'm finally on board with all the weirdness that comes with this show. It took a while, but I absolutely have to see how this thing ends. I'm ready for that finale if that's what we get next week. Come back, drop a comment. We'll go back and forth and talk about what was the best thing from this week's episode, because there was a lot and it was a great episode. If you're the type of person that's into it, that's great. But if you're not, that's fine too. Enjoy yourself. Guard your heart. Come back and see me on another video.